All right, how you guys doing today? We about to hop into a little reaction. The first things first, though, just make sure you like that video, man. Hit a little X in full screen, scroll a bit, like it, and then full screen it back up. You feel me? We got a video coming from Cross Examined. You know the boy Dr. Frank Turek, one of my favorite apologists, And we have my favorite topic, objective morality, and an atheist professor. Now, this is just a fantastic thing. You know what I'm saying? This is my favorite, one of my favorite people, one of my favorite topics, and this is a highly acclaimed person. He's a professor, so at least he should know a lot, right? He should. So let's just hop right into it. Let's just check it out.
Yeah, it's unfortunate it's not a debate. I've debated Guyvid and William Lane Craig and Bert Spalding here, but this isn't a debate, so I have to limit what I have to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Bruce Russell, who's been teaching philosophy here at Wayne State University since 1978. Wow. Dr. Russell, go ahead, sir. And thank you for coming, by the way.
There are several things I agree with you on, and I'm glad you defended them, namely this kind of independence of truth and the endorsement of logic. We're on board there with each other. And the acceptance of the principle of non-contradiction, of course. And actually, although some people might be surprised, think that miracles are possible. The questions for me are not just about truth, but mainly about justification. So truth is the object of my beliefs, but whether I hold them or not depends on what evidence I have for them. So I actually have an answer to your question that you pose to atheists like me. If Christianity were true, would you accept it or believe it? And my answer is, no, that's the wrong question. If it were rational to believe it's true, I would accept it.
Yeah, that's what I mean by the question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to be clear. So now the ones I don't agree with are your answers to the God exists and the resurrection issues. And I can't do this here. Of course, I do it in my philosophy religion class, go through all those traditional cosmological, teleological, moral arguments. And they're all open, as philosophers know, to very serious criticism. I can't do all that here. It's unfortunate it's not a debate. I've debated Guyvid and William Lane Craig and Bert Spalding here, but this isn't a debate, so I have to limit what I have to say. The general picture is there are arguments for the existence of God, and there's a problem of evil, which I think is a killer argument against. Not your version of the argument for me, mine. So I'm just going to focus on one of the arguments for, but you can ask me about other ones if you wish.
Go ahead.
It's a matter of time.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the moral argument. So this is one I thought was the worst case that William Lane Craig and Guyvid and many other theists make, because I think there are necessary moral truths that you can know by understanding the concepts. I think it's necessarily wrong-making to rape someone. I think it's wrong to betray a friend. I think it's wrong to exploit people. I think it's wrong to harm people just for the fun of it, and so on.
We agree. The question is, what justifies that being wrong?
The answer is, it's a conceptual truth, like the truth that knowledge requires true belief, or the truth that, I don't know, 2 + 2 is 4. That doesn't mean that everyone always believed these necessary truths. I think it's a necessary truth that slavery is wrong. That, of course, doesn't mean that everybody believed it, but there are many examples in logic and math where people believed false things and only later came to see that there were truths that were necessary truths that they thought were false.
Right, but right now we're talking epistemology. How do you know something?
The question is by knowing, understanding the concepts, as in math, and in logic, and in epistemology. I gave that example. How do I know that if you know something, it's true? The answer is because the very concept of knowledge implies that's so.
Right. Knowledge, as you know, I'm just doing this for the audience.
Okay.
How you know something's called epistemology, but the object you're knowing deals with ontology. The question is, if there is no God, what is the standard that says murder is wrong and rape is wrong and love is good? And why are we obligated to obey it if there is no God?
That's equivalent to the question for me. How do we know that 2 + 2 is 4 if there's no God? The answer is we know that 2 + 2 is 4, independent of any kind of evidence or knowledge of God, because we understand the concepts. And though morality is not about numbers, it's about wrongness. And there are certain concepts that are linked necessarily to wrongness, like rape and exploitation, and the list I partly went through.
Right. The question is, why is it wrong to rape or murder if there is no God, there is no purpose to life, and we're just overgrown germs? We're just, as someone said, we're either God imagers or we're clever, murderous monkeys fighting for control over the banana supply.
That's a false dichotomy.
Why is it, though, Dr. Russell? Why is it wrong to say, or why do we have a moral obligation if there's no purpose to life?
Oh, because we can have obligations that are not tied to purposes. We're not all consequentialists about morality, but so you can have, breaking a promise can be wrong.
Why?
Well, look, this is a question I think you're asking me is, why is 2 + 2 = 4? That makes no sense. If you agree that it's conceptually necessary that if you rape somebody, you do something wrong, then it makes no sense to ask, well, how can it be wrong if there's no purpose in life or so forth?
Okay, well, first of all, you might be surprised, maybe not to learn, that I believe math is grounded in the nature of God as well.
So, he's kind of going in this little circle here. He's like, well, I think you're asking me 2 + 2 = 4. Well, sir, that's a different question. You know what I'm saying? But on the grounds of what Dr. Frank is saying, if you're not like following to the utmost extent, because it took me a while to understand this too, which is why it's actually one of my favorite topics, and I just wanted to hear. This guy is actually more proclaimed in university than I thought. He's been teaching since '78, so that's 22 years to get to 2000 plus another 25. That's 47 years he's been teaching. It's probably about half his life, if not way more than half his life. I don't know how old he is, but he looks pretty old. But what he's saying is, right, we're overgrown germs. Essentially, we were byproducts of chance. Therefore, everything we do, technically, because it was chance, does not matter. You know what I'm saying? We weren't made with intention. There was no intent behind making us. It just so happened to be. And if it so happened to be, then there isn't anything that's saying like, oh, you have this direction, you have this direction, right? And that's where that answer of, or that little phrase on purpose came up, and direction, or whatever he said. And there is none, because we're byproducts of chance, right? If we're just living and dying, nothing we do matters, and nothing we do is inherently right or wrong, right? People ascribe meaning to it, particularly because they want to feel better about themselves. There is nothing if we're all byproducts of chance. It's just like, well, you happen to be here, and since you happen to be here, I guess do whatever you want, make life whatever you want about it, like make life seem to be whatever you want, because you're not even supposed to be here. So you might as well just make the best of it. And if everybody's allowed to make the best of it, then my best and your best are probably two conflicting things. I think that my best is going to college and becoming an early childhood education major. Your best may be that you are a biology major. And somebody else's best may be that they want to just go out there and do a whole bunch of wrongdoings to a whole bunch of people. And if that's their best, then who am I to say that that's wrong? Because he's just making the best of it. He's making the best of his time, his chance. Is he making the best out of somebody else's? No. But who's to say that's wrong if it's all chance? We could objectively say he is harming those people. He is making it harder for those people to achieve their best. But at the same point, what's wrong about hindering somebody else's best if it's all just chance? Because there was no intention there. These people ascribe that intention to themselves, which makes it inherently purposeless, right? You ascribed your own thing. You weren't in charge of making yourself. You ascribing your own thing, and you didn't make yourself. It don't matter. And that's basically the point that Frank is getting at. And hopefully bro sees that, and we got still half the video left, so we'll see about that.
Because you don't think that math is a human conception, do you?
I know. I think it's a human discovery. They just are truths. There are always
right.
been.
You're discovering truth,
but not. It doesn't take God for those truths to exist. 2 + 2 = 4, regardless of whether God exists or not.
Well, how would 2 + 2 = 4 be true if nothing existed?
Well, if nothing existed, I mean, even the proposition 2 + 2 = 4, it couldn't be, but there's a proposition 2 + 2 = 4 that's necessarily true. And so there are propositions as well as lecterns and microphones and professors.
Okay, but my contention is nothing would exist unless God existed. As Leibniz said, if there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? And I think math is actually an argument for a mind, and the idea that our universe is mathematically describable, I think, points back to a mind who created and sustains this universe.
Well, you assume that things, there must be some reason for things to exist, but there needn't be reasons for necessary truths to exist. Certainly there needn't be the reasons you cite, namely that life has to have some other lifely purpose in life, that those truths could exist. Why do they exist? Because they're necessary truths. That's the
necessary. Why is anything necessary if there is no God?
Well, why is it? I mean, don't you think? I don't know. This seems like a killer example to me, but you don't take it as one. That it's necessarily true that 2 + 2 is 4. That if you know something, what you know is true. That it's wrong to rape people. It's wrong to exploit them.
I agree with all that. I agree with you, and I are on the same page, Dr. Russell, that all those things are true. My question is what grounds those truths? Because you're not a materialist, are you?
No.
Okay, so how do you ground immaterial reality?
Why is there something rather than nothing, do you mean?
No, immaterial reality. How do you ground the laws of logic, the laws of mathematics, the laws of morality, if there's no God? How are those things grounded?
Because actually they're the best explanation of what we discover when we start investigating math and logic and whatnot.
Right, but you're talking epistemology. Again, I'm talking ontology. Why do those things exist to discover to begin with?
Okay. I'm giving you a reason to believe why they exist. I thought you were asking me for that. Why we should believe they exist is because they best explain our discoveries when we start doing math and logic. And all you're giving are evidential arguments. Every one of your arguments doesn't guarantee truth. It's an evidential argument. I'm giving an evidential argument to think that there are necessary math, logic, truths, and truths about epistemology and ethics.
Well, I'm using the laws of logic and my senses in order to discover truths outside of myself.
But you're not using just logic and your senses. You're using something like inference of the best explanation.
Yes.
Well, so am I.
Okay.
I'm using an inference of the best explanation to explain why you should believe that there are logical, mathematical, and ethical truths that are necessarily true, which means true in every possible...
Well, I agree they're true in every possible world, but I just don't see any grounding on it on atheism. Why?
But that means you just rejected my inference of the best explanation argument for their existence that has no implications about God.
Hey guys, please. Go ahead. Sorry, sir.
No,
Go ahead.
I said you just rejected my inference of the best explanation why we should believe that there are math, logic, and moral truths independently of the existence of God.
I'm asking for the grounding of those things. Obviously, math and logic are not moral issues. Morality is an obligation.
The only arguments you give for the grounding in God are inferential arguments just of the same sort, but with different conclusions. You have ontological conclusions that are based on inference of the best explanation, and I have exactly the same kind of argument to infer that there are necessary truths that don't require God's existence.
Well, that's where we disagree. I can't see how there's any obligation if we're just overgrown germs.
We're not just overgrown germs. We're people with brains, and having brains enables us to have certain emotions and thoughts and so forth that make us distinct from a lectern or a mouse.
Yes, that's true. The question is, how did we get here? And if we got here by a blind process, it doesn't matter how big of our brains are. They're just different in degree, and there's no overall arching purpose to life. It makes no difference in the end whether we murder one another or we love one another.
Oh, no, that doesn't follow at all. Well, you just rejected my arguments that said there are necessary moral truths.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Russell. Yes, thank you. We can talk some more later, but I appreciate your comment.
So I'll say I got my friend, right? If you've been on the channel for a while, you've heard me talk about my biologist friend, right? We have had talks like this a lot in the past. And when you talk with somebody who studies a lot of information, they like to dance around topics, not necessarily like dance around topics too much to the point they don't like answer them, but more so they get caught up on the literal questions being asked in a scientific way, if that makes sense. So like we'll be talking and I'll ask a question and he'll ask 30 questions about my question to make sure he understands what's being asked. However, when you're talking with somebody that like doesn't grasp the same topic to the same extent that you do, but is just asking a general question to get your understanding. So he said, like, what's your grounding? What is your ground? That's a pretty simple question. Why do you believe what you believe, and how did you come to get to know that? What's your grounding? Why do you believe that these things are independent of God and all this, and they exist without God existing? And then you'll get like 30 questions about what that question really means, and then he brings up the inference of existence or whatever he said, and then it's like, yeah, that's cool, but you're giving fancy answers to non-fancy questions, and that's not what I need here. Because then it gets to the point where they're not really answering the question. Like, they're answering the question, but it's not how you ask the question, if you get what I'm saying. They're like, well, these things are wrong, and it's like, well, I didn't ask why these things are wrong. I asked how you know these things are wrong. Because I can tell you why they're wrong. They harm other people, but why is harming other people wrong if we're just these overgrown cells? And, you know, it didn't seem like he could answer that question. He just disagreed from a fundamentalist point of view. Not fundamentalist, he disagreed from the fundamentals of the question. Like, he just said, well, I don't believe that. Why? That's what he was asking you the whole time for 13 minutes straight. But, you know, some people, it's okay. Okay. But all in all, point of this video being, I hope that you guys can see based off what I explicated, because Frank didn't explicate it in the way that he usually does when he's breaking it down for somebody that doesn't understand. I think he was thinking that this guy generally understood, which is what he got into a little bit at the end there when he started talking about, like, well, I thought blah 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 blah, and he was basically like, oh, I thought you would know this, bruh. You should know this. You should understand this. But with the overgrown germs thing, like I said, you know, if we're all products of chance, then nothing we do matters, because they weren't made with intention, meaning we don't have intention, which means nothing that we do is right or wrong. That's putting it as simply as possible, right? And I hope you guys can see that, you know, harming somebody is wrong. But if you don't believe in God, then it's not. That's really it. And I hope that this helps you to have another way to defend your faith on somebody, even if they're bringing up like a whole bunch of science terms or whatever. You can always bring back in morality, like, why is it wrong to do this and why is it wrong to do that? Because even what he mentioned at the end with our brains, he's like, well, we have brains that differentiate us from a lectern and a mouse and whatever. And it's like, why don't we hold them to the same standard? Why do we only care about human life and not all life, if that's the case, right? Mice have brains. We use them to study humans. Why would we not care about these mice? Why do we enslave these mice? Is it because our minds are intelligent? Because if they're made in the same way, then they're just the same as us. We're all byproducts of this chance. So we should all be equal, should we not? What's the standard on why we're not equal? And they would not have an answer for that. I almost guarantee it. But anyway. All right, that's going to be the end of the video. I hope you guys have yourself a fantastic rest of your day. Peace.